Welcome to the Personality Couch podcast, where we discuss all things personality. I'm your host, Doc Bach, here with my co-host, Doc Fish. We are both licensed clinical psychologists in private practice, and today we are wrapping up our series on antisocial personality disorder. In this episode, we explore what this personality looks like when combined with the passive, detached, and turtle-like schizoid personality. As an often deadly combo, we analyze the very disturbing case of serial killer Dennis Nilsen while also discussing how these two types are more similar than you'd think. Let's get to it.
So first, we need to caveat that schizoid personality is not typically dangerous on its own. It's a turtle type. They're usually harmless. They just want to be left alone in their little turtle shell. So they'll hide from you or maybe jump in the water if they're approached. They're skittish and would much rather be in their fantasy world than engaged with other humans. So schizoids are passive types.
Yes, they are. But antisocials, on the other hand, are the actively countercultural and angsty types that are alpha. At the disorder level, they are often defiant, go against authority and rules, and therefore find themselves either in positions of authority where they can flout the law or in criminal institutions for breaking the law.
According to Milan's theory, antisocial and schizoid personalities are actually opposite in terms of adaptation and energy. So again, schizoids are passive and antisocials are active. They're actually both detached from pain, but the schizoid is also detached from pleasure, while antisocials can be pleasure-seeking. And then antisocials are strongly self-oriented, while schizoids are average in this area. However, both are very much detached from others.
So the main overlaps here are detachment from others and pain. But the schizoid and the antisocial personality on paper seem like total opposites in every other way. But they do have more in common than one would think.
Yes. So despite the DSM not having any overt overlaps, there are quite a few similarities. So for starters, schizoid and antisocials are both often raised by neglectful parents, which leads to that detachment.
Yeah, and schizoids are emotionally detached from the world, sometimes even from their own needs. So skis or skits means to split or to split off from their needs and from the needs of others. Now, antisocials are detached emotionally because they just don't care. Like caring and empathy means weakness, which is rejected.
And they're both non-responsive to the environment at neurological levels involving the central nervous system. So like their skin isn't going to sweat as much kind of stuff. My own hypothesis is that antisocials underwent so much trauma that they need a higher threshold to react to stimuli. Well, schizoids can be just so detached from the world outside of themselves that they just don't have the same physical responses.
Interesting.
So, for example, if you put like an ice cube in the hands of a patient with severe schizophrenia who's catatonic, they don't react. The antisocial, however, they're not going to let you put the ice cube there in the first place. If you did somehow catch them off guard, they're not going to probably flinch because they don't want to show weakness.
Yes, that's a great example. Yeah. So research shows that severe schizoid types, like as in schizophrenia, and severe antisocial types, as in psychopaths, are very much non-responsive, but for different reasons. So there was a study in 1984 by Rain and Venable that found that there is a subsection of antisocials that have schizoid qualities, and they are both non-responsive and non-conforming.
Exactly. So non-conforming. Schizoids, they couldn't care less. But it's passive versus like the antisocial personality. It's active defiance.
Yeah.
So schizoids fly under the radar. They don't obviously defy authority or prove independence. So they're non-conforming, but it's a low profile. They don't really have that internal pressure to follow the rules, but they also don't point it out.
Yeah.
So the underlying intent is detachment from the need to conform or please others. It's not defiance.
Yeah, versus antisocials prove their independence and control. They actively violate rules. For the healthy antisocial, it may mean breaking rules that they feel don't make sense and maybe prove to others that they have a better way of doing things. But for the severely unhealthy antisocial, this may be breaking rules that actually violate others. So then we also have to talk about aloofness, though, because that's another way that antisocials and schizoids overlap with one another. So schizoids are often unattached hermits. They prefer a solitary lifestyle, showing indifference to relationships because relational intimacy is too much. Like people are too much. There's too many demands, too many needs, too many pulls, right?
Exactly. And then meanwhile, antisocials are aloof in their rejection of others in society. So they don't fit in, they don't want to fit in, and they just do their own thing, making up their own rules to life.
Yeah. And here, I do think we need to revisit Milan's nomadic antisocial personality. We talked about this subtype in our antisocial subtypes episode, which I will link on YouTube and the show notes if you want to learn more. But briefly, nomadic antisocials are dark on the inside, but a turtle on the outside. So this type has schizoid and avoidant features. So they harbor deep anger and resentment stemming from previous rejection, disappointment, and injustices. They react to this anger by detaching and moving away from the social world. And in doing so, they reject societal responsibilities like work, taking care of a house, having a family, etc. So they have that detached schizoid component to their psyche.
Yes, so they are passively asocial in shedding any responsibility and focusing only on basic survival. So, like literally roaming, wandering, maybe sometimes being homeless, functioning on the outskirts of society. Internally, though often unconscious, they do feel abandoned, unwanted, and ostracized. So, some researchers even say that these types were often adopted as children and become wanderers, like forever searching for a home.
That's powerful. Yeah, they don't feel like they fit in with society, so they detach. There is a dissociative part to their psyche in their disconnection, which is also very schizoid. But here's where the types can become dark, though. So because they are antisocials at the core, they harbor that deep resentment and hostility towards others. And there is still a stimulation seeking part of them that schizoids do not have.
Exactly. So then if they're provoked by an external event, a person, or even substances, they can act out that resentment in a very impulsive or even predatory way. So this might include violating the rights of others, such as like physical or sexual assault, but it's usually on others that they perceive as weaker or unable to fight back, like easy prey. So young, older, disabled, sex workers.
Yeah, and this is where the danger really comes into play. So that detachment and off the grid or otherwise loner style of living combined with the vindictiveness and acting out dynamics, this is what leads to really dangerous characters. So the types that could murder you and others potentially and still remain on the run.
Right. And this is where the schizoid's passiveness and ability to detach can become more dangerous, but only when it's mixed with another personality.
Yes.
So on its own, it's not dangerous usually, not any more so than a turtle would be. But when you mix it with antisocial or other dark features like sadistic or paranoid personalities, that detachment can very much become problematic.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it could lead to cold-blooded killing with that detachment that's necessary to, I don't know, dismember bodies as one would a computer or toy they're learning about.
Well, that is chilly.
Yeah.
So I do want to reiterate that this is extremely rare. It can happen, and it can be very dark and deadly in combination with other dark personality traits.
Yes, in combination with other dark personality traits. That's key. Yeah. So schizoids and antisocials, with their detachment and non-conformity, can turn psychopathic. In fact, a psychopath with schizoid features is among the most dangerous types because when you mix that social angst with sadism and schizoid aloofness, these psychopaths are able to detach from people like an inanimate object, meaning that they can be cold-blooded killers and not even blink.
So, forensic psychiatrist Michael Stone actually had a really great quote about this. Among serial killers, some of the most gruesome murders are committed by the schizoid killer who can mutilate and carve up bodies with no disturbance of emotion, much as though he were a child whittling wood or taking apart a clock to see what's inside.
Oh, yikes. That is wild to me.
Well, in Stone's book, The Anatomy of Evil, he talks about how there's 3 personality disorders that have a close relationship to crime, particularly to violent crime.
Mm-hmm.
So the evil actions described throughout the book are often byproducts of these disorders, whether singular or in combination with other dark personality features.
I'm thinking surely schizoid isn't one of the top 3.
It's not in the top 3, but it is close.
Ooh.
So the 3 disorders are antisocial, psychopathic, and sadistic.
Okay, no surprise. The 3 darkest personality types of all time. Yeah.
Surprisingly, though, schizoid actually comes in number 4. So he notes that this type deserves consideration because schizoid personality is seen in about half of the men committing serial sexual homicide.
Oh, wow.
Now, in the general population, schizoid personality is present in only 1%. And then we combine that with actual people who are committing serial homicides. That's very much less so. Then in that subsection, that's where we have the schizoid.
Right. This is so interesting. And this makes me think we have talked about how intimacy can feel intrusive with schizoid. So I'm wondering, could it be that in combination with other dark things and personality traits that would lead to killing, of course, like if they kill their partner, does that mean that they won't intrude on them?
Actually, it's even more schizoid than that. So they don't usually have partners. And so then they kill strangers. So it's like another step removed. And then among serial killers, schizoid traits are also common where they like yearn for an attachment that they're psychologically unable to negotiate.
Oh, that is fascinating. And I think that the case that we're about to talk about actually depicts this inner conflict, that intimacy is too much, yet they long for those relationships. Mm-hmm. And then at severe levels, they can act out that conflict through murder. Mm-hmm.
Oh boy.
Yes, okay. That is coming up next. So hold your horses. So another issue here, though, is the isolation of the schizoid. So any psychopathology can worsen due to lack of social feedback from engaging in the social world, right? But this only fuels the schizoid's rich inner world, allowing them to become more and more strange and potentially even unhinged. And that's what this case is about of the Scottish serial killer and necrophile Dennis Nilsen.
Yes.
Now, before we get into this case, let me just say, if you are squeamish and you don't do true crime stuff, no judgment here. If you have young children around, this is not going to be suitable for young minds or the faint of heart. Again, no judgment, you do you. But this case does get into some pretty intense and graphic things as well. So we are also not diagnosing here because that's outside the bounds of what we can do. But it is interesting to speculate about this well-documented case that has been covered by all the experts in the field because it is truly so bizarre.
Right. So let's get into it.
Yes.
Okay. So in my opinion, actually, a lot of the schizoid-related killers described by researchers feel more paranoid and or sadistic, like actively sadistic to me, especially considering that schizoids are passive. Now, in Nilsen's case, I think he very well may have a big schizoid part. So where there's like a schizoid antisocial representation of psychopathy. Yeah. And again, it's not just a schizoid. It's a mixture of schizoid and psychopathy, antisocial, and maybe even sadism.
Totally. Yeah. And schizoid, as we've been saying, needs to be mixed with other stuff to get this bad. But
Mhm.
let's talk about Dennis Nilsen's backstory, because it's really important to understand his psyche and what led to his mass murdering of individuals. So, infamous, Dennis Nilsen was born in 1945. His parents divorced when he was 4, and he lived with his maternal grandfather, whom Nilsen was close with and idealized, describing him as both a protector and a hero. Now, his grandfather was a fisherman and was often away from home, and Nilsen reportedly felt very empty until Grandpa would return. But then, tragically, Grandpa died a couple years later, just after his parents divorced, age 4. Now, Grandpa dies age 6. At that point, Nilsen could not be consoled. He actually stood at the shore waiting for his grandfather to come back and completely rejected love and affection from family members who tried to comfort him.
Yet he also reportedly resented the attention that was provided to his other siblings. He had a sister and a brother. He was jealous of his brother, but closer to his sister. His autobiography states that he was abused by his grandfather, sometimes while drugged and or unconscious. Then other sources say Nilsen later molested both his sister and brother while they were asleep. He was also attracted to many boys that had similar facial features to his sister. And then eventually, his mother actually remarried, had 4 more children, and this decreased parental attention. And it also decreased their financial situation, which obviously increased resentment.
Yeah. You can already see a little bit of that conflict coming out. Like, I'm jealous of my siblings, but yet I'm rejecting people trying to comfort me, my family trying to comfort me. But importantly, at some point in his childhood, he almost drowned at the beach when watching the boats by himself, which this was something that he did frequently as he was longing for his grandfather's return. When he was pulled out to sea during this event, he recalled having a fantasy that his grandfather actually rescued him, but instead it was another youth who was able to save him in that moment and take him to shore. So there's also some other accounts that say that he would actually simulate drowning in the sea to be close with his grandfather. And this time it just went too far.
I see. Oh boy. Okay. Interestingly, and very much unlike a lot of serial killers, he actually kept and enjoyed having pets.
Yeah.
He also held jobs like being a cook in the army and a police officer for a short time. I do think it's notable to say that he bathed by himself in the army due to fears of being outed as gay, which was taboo in the 1960s and 70s.
Sure.
He had a casual relationship with a roommate for 2 years, but then when they went separate ways, he started drinking excessively due to loneliness, and then he started to go to bars to pick up males. So here is where we have the conflicting torture of loneliness and then the yearning for closeness, which can be and often is a schizoid dynamic.
Yeah. So he started picking up men, taking them back to his apartment. And in 1978, at age 33, he was no longer in the army at this time, but at age 33, Nilsen strangled and killed one of them for the first time. Now, tragically, this was a 14-year-old boy. So he then cleaned and dressed the body and actually kept it under the floorboards in his apartment, engaging in necrophilic acts until the body was too decomposed, which is, this is just vile to think about. But in his case, thinking about all the pieces, it makes me wonder if perhaps he kept the bodies in the floorboard for like friends and non-intrusive companionship and intimacy.
Very possible. Now, I do think that because his first victim was 14, it feels relevant because
Absolutely.
It was around that age that he joined the army. So maybe signifying like a loss of youth and power. Now, eventually he killed 15 men, but he also released others in at least one botched attempt. So he would strangle them. And then if he determined they weren't dead, he would actually drown them in the bathtub.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And he was doing this without getting caught. Like this was multiple years. No one was even on the hunt for him. So that's also pretty unusual. Like that these victims weren't, I hate to say it, they weren't missed which I'm sure they were, but no one was coming forward to the police at this point. But back to what you were saying about the bathtub, this is why I brought up the piece of his childhood of the near drowning incident, because I would argue that in these murders, there's some trauma that's being acted out and mastered, if you will. Also, the strangulation piece, though. So some reports note that when he was abducted in the army, he was not in a safe place where he was stationed, and he was beaten unconscious and locked in the trunk of a car. And I have to wonder if that also plays into this, like all of those experiences, because he also reported that after that experience in the army, that event became sexualized in his mind.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so there's lots of psychoanalytic stuff here, but also, let's just add to it. Let's talk about his ritual of cleaning and dressing the bodies, because I do think that's one of the major aspects that shows what his motives and desires were. So he cared, maybe just like his grandfather, like cared and bathed him when he was younger, according to his autobiography.
Yes. Yeah. And the killings perhaps was a means to an end for him to get his needs met. Whatever it takes to have this non-intrusive intimacy with others, like the bodies, tragically and totally gross, but they continued to serve a purpose for him after they were dead.
Right. Now, the Anatomy of Evil quotes, the corpses, albeit no longer available for conversation, were at least guaranteed of being there for a while as companions for these lonely loners. They were also available for necrophilic sex for however many days it took before the bodies became rank.
Oh, that's so gross. Oh my gosh. So they were companions. Yeah. And it makes me wonder if by having dead friends, he was also, again, mastering the trauma of losing grandpa so young. So like to bring back grandpa from the dead, basically to keep him around, and horrifically to engage in some of the inappropriate things that he and grandpa did.
It's very, very possible. Ugh.
Yeah.
What's also interesting is then he'd dissect the bodies.
Right.
Of course, only after he had no choice but to discard them. So he, threw organs outside near his apartment or a park, or he would burn or flush other parts. So then he was eventually caught in 1983 when his toilet became clogged due to flushing the remains.
That is wild.
Right? The police showed up. And then he just confessed. He didn't ask for compassion, and he did not show remorse.
Which makes me go, did you want to get busted? Like, this guy is he's not stupid. Right. So he actually only started getting sloppy when he was forced to move to a different apartment that didn't have a garden where he could basically bury the bodies and throw the organs over the fence for the vultures to eat or whatever wild animal. So when he was forced to move to another apartment and there was no more room under the floorboards and there was no place to dispose of the body, or the bodies, that's where he started to get sloppy, and he would carve them up using his knife skills that he learned in the army being a cook. Gross. And then it's like, what do I do with them? Did you really think you could flush them down the toilet and it wouldn't have consequences or a backup? He knew he was going to be busted. And
I think so.
Yeah, maybe he wanted to get caught. But anyway, that being said, this is where the detachment can become so problematic with the schizoid component. It's like, welp, my companions serve their purpose and now I need to get rid of them. So I'm going to carve them up and A, not think about how inhumane that is and awful, but also B, eventually the real world toilet will get clogged, and I'll get caught. Right. It's just what is this?
Right. There's so much there. I also think it's interesting that he was attracted to males who had his sister's facial qualities. Because he was close with his sister. But then also, I wonder if that is a rejection of heterosexuality, or maybe even just a protection of women by pursuing men. It could just simply be a power dynamic. How can you be more powerful than by controlling the life of another man? At the same time, there was a sadomasochistic aspect to his methods. So he's kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
But regardless, He chose men. So he lured men to his apartment, kind of like maybe the C's luring of his grandfather.
That is an interesting hypothesis. Yeah. And his rejection of his own same-sex attraction early on in life is something else that I've read in the different accounts. And I do think it feels relevant here because maybe he felt like he still had to keep it a secret, especially 1960s, 70s, even early 80s timeframe for individuals in the LGBTQ community. It was very different than it is now. But literally, like, he buried the same-sex attraction. If he projected it onto another and then killed the person, and now we're burying it, now we're flushing it, now we're burning it. He would also make burn piles in the garden of his first apartment and burn the remains, put a tire on top to disguise the smell of burning flesh. Like, but that length to like get rid of perhaps his own undesired same-sex attraction. And also no one can rat him out if they're dead. I actually read that his brother made fun of him as a kid and called him a girl since he suspected that he was gay. So maybe this was a really twisted way of making sure he wasn't bullied again. And, you know, to your point, perhaps all of this was maybe a rejection to his attraction to women who look like his sister, which maybe in his twisted mind was like the ultimate immoral thing he could do above and beyond killing people. Who knows?
Who knows? It could be, I don't know, but also alcohol was involved, which his dad and grandfather abused. And he was attracted to being unconscious or being with the unconscious, which would then get rid of like any emotional intimacy involved in coupling. But also perhaps is a representation of a schizoid experience of feeling non-existent. However, in conflict, strangling is intimate. Both strangling and drowning involve death by asphyxiation. So like, did he have like limited air? Did he feel suffocated?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's one worth thinking about. And I think it speaks to the juxtaposition of the schizoid wanting intimacy, but fearing it just the same, and the antisocial wanting intimacy, but rejecting it, and then working out those conflicts in a really dark and morbid way. And I also think of remastering the childhood trauma, like the loss of a father figure, as well as his own near death by drowning, right? Like this near death by asphyxiation, presumably when he was locked in the trunk of the car in the army too. Like there's so many pieces to this.
Yeah. And then he had non-intrusive intimacy with a body that no longer existed as a person until it became too gross.
Right.
And then he dissected it. Like he split it up. He split up the body, just dumped the innards like they didn't matter.
Oh my gosh.
Similar to maybe emotions that don't matter.
Ooh.
Maybe. And then he burns, flushed other parts. Now, symbolically, fire and water are opposite pieces of the world. So perhaps like his desire to be both the actor and the passive player sexually. But also this method may represent the schizoid fear of falling apart into nothing because we're dissecting and discarding and now there's nothing.
Right. That's an excellent point. Yeah. I think in these killings, he is working out those conflicts, traumas, and fears. And to your point, emotions and internal workings don't matter. Like just discard them, right? Throw them over the fence, basically, or burn them. So schizoids are often disconnected from their bodily needs anyway. And I think you bring up an interesting point about the schizoid's fear of falling apart into nothing. Like, is he mastering that fear by working it out in his dead companions? Like the fear of falling apart is projected onto the dead body that is now dismembered. Is it representing his own falling apartness or dissociative qualities, like the fragmenting of his companions, including the skulls? He would boil their skulls. Like, why the head? Why sever the head? Like, there's something here. There's something here.
Right. I was just about to say that.
Yeah.
Because he severed, he took the body away from the head.
Yeah.
And I think at some point he was able to state in his own self-reflection that he did feel like he was two different people. Like he was fragmented. He went to work and was like a functioning human being. And then he took off work and he was not a functional human being and he was killing people.
Yeah.
But the fragmentation of his companions wants, his identity, his fantasies, his roles. It's a very detached cognitive method of killing and hiding it. There's not really emotions with that. And that doesn't really seem like the typical serial killer.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And even I've read some accounts that said that he would speak to himself in third person, almost as if he was watching himself during the killings, where it's like, OMG, here we go again. But it was like third person. So there's like a lot of dissociative pieces of this. And to your point, he had two selves, like the work self and then the sexual self that killed. But unlike most serial killers, Nilsen didn't seem to have hatred. Like most serial killers carry a deep loathing for family members and harm those that represent family members.
Mm-hmm.
Though Nilsen may have unconsciously carried hatred, it didn't really surface like it does with most, I don't even want to say normal killers, because that's not even a thing. But most serial killers don't typically follow that psychological pattern. Though there was some resentment towards caregivers, as we've talked about, it was more internal and less overt. But the resentment towards his siblings then did lead to molesting them, as well as perhaps his own resentment towards his repressed sexuality.
Right. And he didn't show any animosity towards those he killed. He was pretty self-reflective and pretty intelligent too. Mm-hmm. So he was more curiously attached to his victims, which maybe symbolized his grandfather, who he did love. But it's only a hypothesis. They were younger males, and he used to be a younger male. So I also wonder if part of it was trying to kill the self that he didn't like.
Ooh, yeah.
I don't know. The curiosity piece is a schizoid dynamic. It can be antisocial too. Like people are interesting, but better to be studied from a distance when they're not alive. I don't know. And he certainly created that distance in murdering his so-called companions.
Oh, yeah. There's no bigger distance than that. Like murder. Hello. Goodness. But also interesting, it's worth noting during trial, it was determined that he actually wasn't psychotic, but instead mentally abnormal, having an impaired sense of identity, and was able to depersonalize to the point that he felt hardly anything about his murderous activities. So interestingly, there were 3 forensic evaluators there looking at his psyche, all of them except one who completely said nothing's wrong with him, which is wild to me. Wonder how much he was paid to say that. I don't know. I have no idea. But anyway, 2 of them mentioned antisocial, narcissistic, borderline, and schizoid in their conceptualization of him. So all up in that cluster B stuff with the dramatic, erratic personality, and then schizoid. Fascinating.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that takes me back to that like eerie detachment where he could dismember a body in a similar way to just tearing apart a computer to investigate, right? There's no real feelings. He's just doing what he needs to do to dispose of the body, hide the evidence. And that's where that aloofness of the schizoid, when it is paired with other dark personalities that's problematic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, this could be too, like maybe there was some interest and curiosity about the human body that he would take time off work and to carve up the bodies on his kitchen floor, like using those knife skills he learned in the army as a chef. It's just, we're butchering another piece of meat. Like, is there also a curiosity about the inner workings or a discarding of things? I don't know. This feels psychodynamically ripe for the picking.
Right. Like maybe he knew there was something wrong internally with him, or he felt like something was wrong internally. And so now he's searching, like, what is the inside supposed to look like?
Right. What am I supposed to look like on the inside?
Yeah.
Yes.
Ugh.
And then I think that takes me to the next piece of I think he was asking to get caught because he was no dummy. And if you go undetected, like not even on the radar with 15 murders, because you're choosing people that are more nomads or people that are in the LGBTQ community at the time who didn't feel like they could go forward to the police, lest they be outed or lest the police be, say, oh, that's a domestic dispute or that's, BDSM gone wrong. And that's a domestic thing. Like he chose people that wouldn't come forward, but to go undetected for that long and then let a blocked toilet be the thing that outed you? Like, you're asking for it. Like, seriously, you're asking for it.
That's gross. And there's no other way to say it. Like, he knew it was coming eventually.
And maybe in that he was searching for, like, knowing, okay, if I get caught, then maybe I'll find what I'm looking for. Like, I mean, there's companionship, if you can call it that, in prison. You have people around you.
You do.
You're selled off. But like, I have no idea. But he did go on to write an autobiography. He did hours and hours and hours of interviews, like almost like he was doing therapy on himself through prison and through these different interviews with forensic, evaluators. It's like, did he find what he was looking for once he got caught? I don't know. I haven't read his full autobiography, but this is a weird one. This is real weird.
It is, right? So the lack of the emotions, like the anger and the drive, but then also I didn't get the sense that he was searching for fame either in the interviews. It was more of this like analytical, like, who am I? Why am I doing this? It's still not right, of course, but it's odd. It's very odd.
This isn't your typical serial killer profile, which is why every person who's anybody has studied him. In the forensic realm. Yeah.
Right. I get it. I want to do more, actually. So anyway, this case actually reminds me a little bit of the passive affectionless psychopath, which is a more historical term, but it's more of a passive schizoid psychopath versus an actively antisocial psychopath. There's emotional bluntness or deficits, mostly seen in social relationships. There's an inability then to even feel shame or remorse. So basically not having a conscience. There's no decency. They're cold, surly. They seem to cognitively know and understand social norms and morality. They don't feel it, and they're therefore indifferent.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's possible that Nilsen could fit here with the more schizoidy flavor. But given his ability to blend in with society and have a functioning job for so long with the army and then as a police officer, I'd say he was even sociopathic in his ability to blend in with the social herd. Like, he was always odd. Even in the army, he was odd. Like, he would ask his fellow soldiers to play dead, like pretend like they're slain in battle, and he would take pictures of them. Like, he was preoccupied with death. Everyone knew he was odd. He had different interests. Anyway, now I'm getting off track. This is just a really bizarre, fascinating case that I could go on about. But he could blend in. Still odd, but blend in. But it was his sexual fantasies that got him into trouble because he acted them out. And he sexualized death and the unconscious. But he kept it contained, even in his murders, until the fragmented body parts caused the toilet to overflow. Like literally, his own fragmented parts couldn't be hidden any longer.
Oh my goodness. I agree.
Yeah.
That's crazy to think about. Okay, but he can't be a full schizoid at the core because
Definitely
schizoids are so passive.
Yeah.
And he actually acted out his fantasies. And that action fits more with the antisocial, psychopathic, or sadistic personality, but there are schizoid flavors.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I see a lot of the antisocial line in his upbringing and in his experiences and in some of the accounts that I've read. I see that piece pretty clearly too with him. Yeah. So I do think it is important to kind of bring in the thread of the Enneagram here just briefly, because there's dark schizoid dynamics even in that, in a non-pathological way. So because schizoid overlaps with the type 5 on the Enneagram, antisocial overlaps with the type 8. So according to Enneagram typology, these types share a line of growth and stress. So again, this is non-pathological levels. This is just fun typology. But the schizoid type leans into the antisocial energy. And in stress, the antisocial becomes more schizoid-like. So again, very simplistic way to describe this. And the Enneagram is not a measure of pathology, as I keep saying. It's just typology. But it highlights that the antisocial and schizoid line is related, even in non pathological levels.
Yes, and definitely at pathological levels too, I think, as
Absolutely.
we see demonstrated in this case, which we definitely could probably discuss for like 3 more hours.
Right. Yeah, we could definitely keep going. If this was interesting and you want more true crime stuff, let us know. I'm not sure that that's our jam, but when it's relevant, I don't mind going there. Anyway, today we investigated the dark schizoid, which has psychopathic, sadistic, and antisocial features that can make for a deadly combination. But how do you think schizoid and dark personalities overlap? Let us know in the comments. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like and subscribe. It does really help our channel. And lastly, if you're a personality nerd, we've also got blogs, visuals, and references that coincide with each episode at www.personalitycouch.com. Be well, be kind. We'll see you next time on The Personality Couch. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute a professional relationship. If you're in need of professional help, please seek out appropriate resources in your area. Information about clinical trends or diagnoses are discussed in broad and universal terms and do not refer to any specific person or case.